I'm on a mission to read all the classic novels I didn't read in school and to watch their film adaptations. Today's assignment is an infamous one. It is the only published novel by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. The Picture of Dorian Gray was originally published in 1890 in Lippincott's Monthly Magazine in Philadelphia. In 1891, an extended version was published in novel format and was met with a lot of criticism and controversy, mostly due to the novel's perceived immorality. But to quote one of the main characters of the novel, Lord Henry Wotton, "The books that the world calls immoral are books that show the world its own shame." The original publication in 1890 was met with so much backlash that Oscar Wilde included a preface in the 1891 version defending the novel's content and all the criticisms the book originally received. The preface has been referred to as a manifesto because Oscar Wilde basically used it as a platform to preach the philosophy of aestheticism, an art movement from the 19th century centered around the doctrine art for art's sake. The propaganda, if you could call it that, of aestheticism is prevalent in The Picture of Dorian Gray, and Oscar Wilde was one of the key figures in this movement. Dorian Gray is a novel about pleasure, indulgence, and morality, and it poses the question, if you spend your whole life seeking pleasure at the cost of your soul, is it really pleasure? And the book, or at least Lord Henry, answers this by simply saying, what mattered what the cost was, one could never pay too high a price for any sensation. The titular character Dorian Gray sits for a portrait by an artist, Basil Hallward, who is enthralled by him. To Basil, Dorian is his perfect muse and has altered the way he views art. He's so obsessed that he refuses to even exhibit the portraits he's done of Dorian because he believes he's put too much of himself in these paintings, and that his adoration of Dorian is close to worshipful. Basil's friend, Lord Henry Wotton, who is also referred to as Harry, so if you hear me say Lord Henry and then Harry, they're the same person. Harry, Lord Henry, insists upon meeting Dorian, but Basil refuses. Harry is a cynical man with hedonistic propensities, and Basil worries that he will corrupt his innocent young friend. Dorian shows up at Basil's to sit for a painting, and he and Harry inevitably meet. While he's sitting for the painting, Harry first introduces him to his perspective on the world and strikes worry in Dorian by remarking on his youthful beauty and how it won't last forever. Basil completes the painting, and Dorian laments that the version of him in the portrait will never age, even though his own body will. He makes a wish that if only the painting could age and Dorian could retain his youth forever. His wish is granted, though he doesn't realize it at the time, and Dorian enters a life where seeking and experiencing pleasure despite its consequences becomes his sole priority. Over time, his portrait decays and exhibits the toll that his actions are taking on his soul, while his outward appearance remains forever untarnished. Eventually, Dorian wishes to repent. He believes that in order to cleanse his soul, he must destroy the painting. He stabs it, but instead of destroying the painting, he ends up killing himself. The painting reverts back to its original state, a depiction of young Dorian Gray, untainted, while Dorian himself is grotesquely altered, his outward appearance finally displaying the nastiness of his soul. And a bunch of other stuff happens in between. This video is not an analysis of the novel, but its film counterparts. While I did like the novel and its commentary on Victorian society, as well as themes of beauty and corruption, this video is about the film depictions and how well they adapted the story. There are actually quite a few adaptations, but I will only be focusing on the 1945 and 2009 films. When it comes to book adaptations, I don't expect them to perfectly mirror the source material. What I do wish to see is a basic understanding of the themes of the story, as well as a general vibe match. If you saw my Wuthering Heights video, then you'll know my main gripe with that movie was the complete 180 it took from the source material. The general plot was there, but everything else had been stripped. So basically, when it comes to classic book adaptations, the bar is on the floor. Honestly, I could talk about The Picture of Dorian Gray for a while because I think it's fascinating and the controversies surrounding it and Oscar Wilde are interesting, but that would be way too long a video, and we all know why we're here, to see Ben Barnes.
Well, here I am.
Dorian Gray, directed by Oliver Parker, is the 2009 film adaptation of the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. From what I've seen online, mostly Reddit, people do not love this adaptation. When I looked it up on IMDb to find where to watch it, I also saw that it was rated R. I scrolled down to the content warnings and yeah, we're 2 for 2 on hypersexualized classic novel adaptations. However, it does make more sense to include scenes of that nature in Dorian Gray, and they were not as explicit as the warnings make them out to be. The novel implies these events, as well as several intimate relationships between Dorian Gray and both men and women. Obviously, it can be extremely overt in that time, and supposedly the original version, published in the Lippincott Monthly Magazine, was a bit more explicit. For the time though, even the implicit references to same-sex relations sparked criticism, and the book was used as evidence evidence of Oscar Wilde's own immorality during his trial in 1895. If you didn't know, Oscar Wilde sued the Marquis of Queensberry, who happened to be the father of his lover at the time, Lord Alfred Douglas, for referring to Wilde as a sodomite in a letter misspelled. Like, if you're gonna insult someone, at least spell the insult correctly. Wilde sued the Marquis for libel, but it did not end up in his favor because the Marquis's counsel used the picture of Dorian Gray as evidence against Wilde to prove his immorality and to basically back up the claim that he was a sodomite. Adding explicit sex scenes in the film does make sense for the story since the main theme is pleasure and indulging in the pleasures of life. Hedonism is something that Dorian Gray is introduced to early on, and Lord Henry famously says, "The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it." The borderline vulgarity of these characters giving into their every desire despite the effect on their souls is why so many critics at the time deemed the novel immoral. So in this case, no, the hypersexualized content depicted in this film is not included for shock value or for added sexiness. Well, maybe. They did cast Ben Barnes after all. Instead, it shows exactly what the book tells us, that I, Dorian, have never searched for happiness. Who wants happiness? I have searched for pleasure. This adaptation took a lot of liberties with the source material, and I'm not going to go scene by scene and nitpick every detail. That would take way too long. I'll say that they got the bare bones of the story correct, and that they at least maintain the same plot beats, even if the details leading up to and surrounding them differ from the novel. For example, Dorian meets Harry at a party instead of at Basil's studio, but film is a medium that relies a lot on visuals, so I think having them meet at a party is visually more exciting than if they were just hanging out at Basil's and chatting forever, which is how the book starts. The first few chapters of the book give a lot of context from internal monologues and dialogue between the characters. For a movie, the director has to figure out how to show pages and pages of exposition. So in this case, the changes don't bother me as much. Instead of Harry initially using dialogue to corrupt Dorian during their first meeting at Basil's, it makes sense instead to show him being corrupted instead of someone just saying all these cynical things to him at first. So instead of them just talking at Basil's, they go to a bar in a seedy part of London, and Harry sort of introduces Dorian to this immoral lifestyle. However, there were specific spots where the film strayed a bit too far from the novel for my liking, based on how I interpreted the book, and that's what I want to talk about. In the book, Dorian almost resents the painting's transformation and how it reflects his soul, but he doesn't know how to change or how to really stop being that way. In the movie, he almost seems proud of the corruption. Basil says the painting's transformation is the work of the devil, and Dorian replies with, "I'm a god." This tracks with the movie's representation of Dorian reveling in his soul's corruption, but compared to the novel where Dorian is disgusted by the changes and the painting is his shameful secret, it's definitely a departure from the source material. And while Dorian does derive some pleasure in the novel from keeping the painting a secret, much of the novel's end is dedicated to him trying to do better. Another gripe I had was the way Harry was characterized. I think Colin Firth did a good job, and I generally think he does a great job in most of his roles. However, there were some changes from the book that not even Colin Firth's acting could salvage Harry's character for me. At the end of the movie, there's a big showdown where Harry has figured out that there's something fishy about the painting, and he and Dorian face off in the attic where it's hidden. In the book, it is my interpretation that Harry is indifferent to Dorian's agelessness, and he never really takes responsibility for his part in the corruption of Dorian's soul. The movie introduces a new character, Emily, who is Harry's daughter and who Dorian courts and wants to run away with at the end. This is what turns Harry fully against Dorian. During their face-off in the attic, there is some dialogue that I liked where Dorian tells Harry, "I am what you made me. I practiced what you preached and lived the life you were too afraid to live."
I lived the life that you preached, but never dared practice. I am everything that you were too afraid to be.
In the book, Lord Henry is never truly confronted for his influence on Dorian's life, at least by Dorian. Dorian sees him as a mentor figure until the very end. So in the movie, I did like that Dorian directly addressed Harry's part in the corruption of his soul. Then he tries to kill Harry, even though he said he tried to be better, and then Harry sets the painting on fire. This to me undermines two important moments in the book. One, when Dorian strives to clean his soul, and later when he makes the decision to destroy the painting. The movie then attempts to get Dorian back on track by having him stay in the burning attic, even when he has the opportunity to escape. He then stabs the painting and stays inside to be consumed by it and the fire. A similar resolution as the book does come to pass when Dorian destroys the painting in an effort to cleanse his soul and start over. The movie just felt really convoluted with the additional conflict of Harry trying to destroy it first and then the two of them fighting, etc. Dorian had to be the one to choose to destroy the painting, not have someone else force his hand. In terms of positives for the film, I do have some. There was a lot of good visualization, most notably when Dorian is being stalked by Jim Vane, the brother of his deceased first love, Sybil Vane. In the book, Sybil is an actress that Dorian randomly stumbles upon one evening. He's out for a walk looking for adventure early in the story when he found the theater that Sybil performs at. He was enamored by her performances as different Shakespeare heroines and visited the theater like every night for 2 weeks. No one at the theater knew his name, and Sybil only referred to him as Prince Charming. One night Dorian proposes to her and she tells her mother about him. Her brother James is a sailor and is about to set off for Australia. He has no idea what Dorian looks like or even his name, as Sybil has kept that to herself. He makes a promise that if Dorian ever hurts her, then he will kill him. Dorian tells his friends, Lord Henry and Basil, about his engagement and that they have to see her perform because she's so amazing. They go to a show, but Sybil's acting that night is terrible. Dorian confronts her after the show, and her reasoning for her bad acting is that compared to the love she has for Dorian, the roles she's been playing feel hollow. She says, "The painted scenes were my world. I knew nothing but shadows, and I thought them real. You came, oh my beautiful love, and you freed my soul from prison. You taught me what reality is. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw through the hollowness, the sham, the silliness of the empty pageant in which I had always played." Dorian freaks out and ends their relationship. He basically tells her he wants no part in her life and he never wants to see her again. "You have killed my love. You used to stir my imagination. Now you don't even stir my curiosity. You simply produce no effect. I loved you because you were marvelous, because you had genius and intellect, because you realized the dreams of great poets and gave shape and substance to the shadows of art. You have thrown it all away. You are shallow and stupid." Many people have interpreted this scene as Dorian showing just how shallow he is, which is ironic considering he's calling Sybil shallow. He fell in love with Sybil because every night she was a different role. He drops her after her one off night when she essentially showed her true self to him and he no longer wants her. Sybil mysteriously dies, though it is heavily implied to be suicide as she drank a mysterious substance that instantly killed her. 20 years later, her brother James runs into Dorian. Someone calls him Prince Charming and James corners him. Dorian's excuse to get away is to tell James to look at his face. He says, "It's been 20 years since your sister died and I am no more than 20 years of age." The fact that Dorian is ageless works in his favor here until James finds out about his agelessness and begins to stalk him. He follows him all the way to Dorian's country estate, stalking him. Dorian fears his imminent death and hides away for days, feeling hunted. This is one of the turning points for his desire to cleanse his soul. He confesses his fears to Harry, saying that he feels like death is waiting for him. While his party is enjoying an afternoon of shooting, Jim Vane accidentally enters the crosshairs of one of the shooters and is killed. The ending of the movie, where Dorian feels like he's being watched by Jim Vane, is a good visualization from the book, and one of my favorite parts from both the book and the movie is when Dorian starts to question his life choices, and I feel the movie does a good job portraying that. However, the circumstances surrounding Sybil and Jim's death are quite different from the book. They do retain the same impact though. I will get into the differences later in the video when I compare this movie to the 1945 film. This movie, however, could have been gayer. I guess for 2009 it was pretty risque in terms of same-sex relationships depicted on screen. There's a lot of gay subtext in the book, as we briefly discussed earlier. Oscar Wilde himself was gay, and the book can be considered a critique on society during the Victorian era and how queer people were treated and how they were expected to behave, especially with lines in the book like, "The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it and your soul grows sick with longing for the things it has forbidden it to itself, with desire for what its monstrous laws have made monstrous and unlawful." The monstrous laws Wilde is referring to here could be in reference to the Criminal Law Amendment Act of 1885, which criminalized all male homosexual acts. If there's one thing England stayed consistent with, it's homophobia. There's also a line, "The terror of society, which is the basis of morals, the terror of God, which is the secret of religion. These are the two things that govern us." Overall, I thought the movie was kind of slow, and obviously pivotal details were changed, but I think it does carry the essence of the novel. At times it was fast-paced, more so in the beginning, and there were a lot of weird scene jump cuts that were a bit jarring. As for the portrait being a sentient being, I think the concept of a portrait that reflects your soul and changes based on how much you corrupt your soul is already a supernatural concept. Making the portrait sentient in the film was an interesting choice to set it apart from other adaptations and to evoke the chilling nature of the painting presented in the novel. If I were to rate this movie as an adaptation of the Picture of Dorian Gray, I would give it 2 out of 5 stars. 1 star for maintaining the themes of the source material, and 1 star for the brilliant decision to cast Ben Barnes. If I were to rate this movie as a completely separate entity from the book, I'd give it a 2.5 to 3 out of 5 stars. I was hoping for more of a Sleepy Hollow vibe, and while it was close, it needed a little something extra. The acting for some of the characters, like Sybil, wasn't that great, but that could also be due to the script. The visuals and wardrobe did transport me to Victorian London, but the pacing ultimately threw the movie off for me. However, 2 hours with Ben Barnes on the screen is is not 2 hours wasted, so a win is a win. Before we move on to the next adaptation, let me enlighten you to something. If you want to read or reread The Picture of Dorian Gray, Ben Barnes narrates the Penguin Classics edition, and I very much enjoyed that. There's one scene in particular that I wish was included in the movie because it made me laugh so much. It happens after Dorian kills Basil and tries not to act suspicious in front of Harry afterwards. If you'll recall, Basil was the artist who painted the picture of Dorian Gray. He was obsessed with Dorian, but also strived to protect him from being corrupted, mostly by Lord Henry. Dorian shows Basil the portrait, and its changes, leading to Basil telling him they need to pray for forgiveness. Basil believes it's also a punishment for him worshipping youth and beauty so much. Dorian is angered and stabs Basil repeatedly with a knife. After that happens, he goes to a dinner party with Lord Henry. Lord Henry asks where Dorian was the night before, like what he got up to. Dorian says he didn't get home until nearly 3. Lord Henry asks, "Oh, so you went to the club?" And Dorian says, "Yes. No, I don't mean that. I didn't go to the club. I walked about. I forget what I did." How inquisitive you are, Harry. You always want to know what one has been doing. I always want to forget what I've been doing. I came in at 2:30 if you wish to know the exact time. I had left my latchkey at home and my servant had to let me in. If you want my corroborative evidence on the subject, you can ask him. And Harry replies, "My dear fellow, as if I cared." When I'm in a try not to be obvious competition, but my opponent is Dorian Gray. Anyway, I thought that scene was so funny in the book, or maybe it was just the way that Ben Barnes narrated it. Either way, I wish we could have seen a similar scene in this movie. I would also recommend the Barnes & Noble Classics edition of the book. This one is from 2003 and has an introduction by Camille Cotti, who is an editor and literary critic. She's a specialist on the Catholic conversion trend among members of the avant-garde in London in the 1890s. There's a lot of insightful information on Oscar Wilde, aestheticism, and the time period of when the book was written and published. It's too much to include in one video, so I'll definitely do external research if that sort of stuff interests you. Now on to the next. The 1945 adaptation was directed by Albert Lewin, and within the first 5 minutes I already preferred this one to the 2009 adaptation, just in terms of book accuracy. However, they did take their own liberties with the story. Why is it so hard to adapt a classic novel? Why are we taking so many liberties all the time? Like, it's a classic for a reason, just stick to the source material. The opening scene is almost a word-for-word replica of the first chapter. I was loving it. I was even quoting along with the characters. That's how excited I was. Mostly because I just finished watching the 2009 version, which I had high hopes for, and was taking any scrap of accuracy that I could get. Except here we go again with inserting / reimagining characters that don't need to be there. Gladys was a child and Basil's niece for some reason. I'll talk about that more later. There's also the inclusion of a cat statue in Basil's studio, which was supposedly one of the Egyptian gods, and Dorian makes his wish to remain young in front of it, which is I guess how it comes true. My only reasoning for this statue being such a present motif in the film is that audiences in 1945 couldn't accept an unanswered explanation for why Dorian's portrait aged instead of him, like in the book. He doesn't know why his portrait is reflecting his soul, and that's not really what matters. What matters is he's able to see his soul, something that other characters tell him only God is able to do. Another difference is Sybil. Sybil is a singer at a bar instead of an actress. Well, she just doesn't perform Shakespeare, she sings, which I feel like performing Shakespeare was an important part of her character. Her death also sort of mirrored Juliet's suicide when she believed she could not have her one true love. Her being an actress is also crucial to why Dorian leaves her. He doesn't love her as a person, but views her as a piece of art. As we discussed previously, once she shows the semblance of her true self, he drops her. The 1945 film really doesn't do a good job of explaining why Dorian decides to leave her. I don't know why neither movie didn't want to have the original reasoning for why Dorian breaks up with Sybil. In the 2009 version, it's because Harry pressures Dorian into visiting a brothel, and then Sybil tries to get him to propose. He doesn't want to marry her now that he's exploring this new hedonistic lifestyle. She then drowns herself in the river, and her brother shows up at Dorian's house to kill him. He's taken away to a mental hospital, and 20 years later, he sees Dorian again and begins stalking him. Sorry to jump back to the other movie, but let's return to the 1945 version. In this movie, Dorian is challenged by Harry to test Sybil's virtue. He invites her to stay the night at his house, and if she agrees and gives away her innocence, Dorian is to reject her. It is a fascinating change to the story because it shows how Dorian is being corrupted by Harry by agreeing to the challenge, and in turn Dorian corrupts Sybil by going through with it. Then it cuts to the next scene where Dorian is writing Sybil a scathing letter saying he's leaving England and she'll not play any part in his life. Her death is accurate to the book, where she drinks a mysterious substance and presumably takes her own life. This version was also not very gay, but it was 1945, so the gay subtext of the novel probably went right over their heads, or they doggedly ignored it. One last nitpicky critique is the narration. This film does have a narrator, and while I appreciated the narration due to its accuracy, literally just lifting lines from the book to the relevant scenes, I do think it's kind of a cop-out when movies do a narrator, because I use it to tell emotions and inner thoughts of a character instead of letting the story and the actor show it. I really loved the visuals in this movie, and showing just the painting in color while everything else was black and white was such a cool aspect. This film did get an Oscar for cinematography, which was very much deserved. The use of lighting was so good, and the scene where Dorian kills Basil was framed so well. George Sanders as Lord Henry Wotton did a fantastic job. He definitely got the cynical yapping of Harry's character down. I also think Herb Hatfield was a great Dorian Gray. He made both the innocent and the corrupted sides of Dorian believable. Similar to the 2009 version, this film definitely understood the themes of the story. It started and ended with the same poem: I sent my soul into the invisible, some letter of that afterlife to spell, and by my soul returned to me and answered, I myself am heaven and hell. If I were to rate this movie as an adaptation, I would give it 4 out of 5 stars. It was pretty spot on, especially with the dialogue. There were some discrepancies. Obviously, there's no such thing as a perfect book to film adaptation, but I think overall they did a good job. One reason I wouldn't rate it higher is because it could have done a better job at showing the corruption of Dorian's soul. If I were to rate this movie as a standalone, completely separate from the source material, I would probably give it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was a good adaptation, but not something I would watch again if I weren't already interested in the book. For the time, I do think it was a good movie, and it's cool to see how they made movies back then, especially when it comes to the painting and how they manipulated it through the film. So how do these movies compare to each other? There are positives and negatives to both, and they are vastly different adaptations despite their stories being derived from the same source material. Neither adaptation got Dorian's appearance right. In the book, he's described as blonde-haired and blue-eyed, with characters describing him as made of ivory and gold. I don't think the decision to cast Ben Barnes and Herb Hatfield mattered too much. All that really matters is how they portrayed Dorian and if they managed to capture his essence. Also important was that he was attractive, which Ben Barnes is objectively attractive, so if we could combine the two movies, we might be onto something. The accuracy of the 1945 version combined with the settings, costume, and score of the 2009 version, and Ben Barnes of course, would be good. I also think the 1945 version, like I said, didn't show the corruption of Dorian's soul as well as the 2009 version at least strived to portray. Another thing I think the 2009 version did better was when James confronts Dorian. There's a huge lack of urgency in the 1945 film that I feel the 2009 version captures better, and this could be just the differences of filmmaking in the 20th century versus the 21st century. However, in the book, there is almost a visceral realness to the way Dorian perceives being hunted by Jim Vane. That is why I think the 2009 movie, though the circumstances for Jim hunting Dorian are very different, achieved more urgency. I also feel like the 2009 version pulled inspiration for the 1945 one because they both involve a made-up character that is related to one of the main characters and acts as Dorian's second main love interest. Then another character wants to stop their marriage and decides to break into the secret room to see what Dorian is hiding. Did something happen like this in the book? Like, did I miss something? In the 2009 version, it's Harry's daughter Emily that Dorian falls in love with. In the 1945 version, it's Basil's niece Gladys. Gladys is a character in the book, but she's not related to anyone and doesn't enter into a romance with Dorian. Overall, what I think I've learned is that the age-old adage is true. The book was better. Thank you so much for watching. I plan to make more videos like this where I read classic novels and analyze their adaptations. If you'd like to see more, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to my channel, and leave a comment below with what I should read and watch next. See you next time. Bye.